Hi everyone, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today we're going to conclude, I think, our series on bishop versus knight endings. The first week was more introductory, though I hope it was useful for more than just absolute beginners, let's say. And last week, the second show, looked at an ending where a knight was a hero against the bishop. Wasn't able to win, but it was able to blockade and help me achieve a draw even though I was down 2 pawns. Well, this time, in a way, it's kind of the reverse of last week. So I have the bishops here, and for a long time I used them very well, and I'm able to maintain and increase my advantage against my opponent's knights. But in the end, I got a little bit careless, partially because of time trouble, in part just flaws in my technique, and my opponent was able to escape. So this was played back in 1999 against New York master Juan Sena. And we'll start a little ways in here from this position, and you can gather pretty quickly, I expect, that this was a Queen C2 Nimzo Indian. And characteristic of that variation, I ended up with the bishop pair, and I have some other advantages in the position too, though. So, of course, there's the bishop pair, but there's also this pawn structure in the center, and I think this is clearly to my advantage. The difference is that he has no control whatsoever of the d5 square, while I have perfectly adequate control over d4. And it also is certainly to my advantage that my pawn on f3 is adding to my central control, in this case by its pressure on the e4 square. And in fact, this is very nice for me because it blunts his bishop on b7, so this guy isn't really operating to its maximum potential. And my pawns on c4 and f3 in particular, so let's get rid of all of that stuff, serve to dominate his knight on f6. And on the other hand, his own pawns, ironically enough, on b6, c5, and e5, help to shut in this knight on d7. So really everything is in my favor here. Now, it doesn't mean that I have a big advantage, and in fact, if I'm even careless for a moment and allow black to play e4, then my advantage is probably non-existent. So the first question for you, my viewers, to work through is, what should I do about this threat of e4? So take however long you need, hopefully not too long, and try to come up with the best answer you can to that question. Okay. Well, if you said that what white should play is e4, then you might want to reconsider. And the reason is that, as I mentioned before, the pawn on e3 was really nice because it's helping to control the d4 square, and it gives me kind of a unilateral advantage in the center because I have the possibility of exploiting d5, while my opponent does not have the possibility of exploiting the d4 square. So by playing a move like e4, I'm really forfeiting that advantage. And now black can try to reroute one of his knights to this beautiful d4 square, or maybe he could play the knight to h5 and try to get one of them to f4 and use the other knight to go to d4. So this would be a serious mistake for me. And it's also bad because it would really diminish the scope of my bishop on d3. So I think the best way to handle this problem of the e4 threat is with the move that I played in the game, bishop to f5. So now e4 isn't a threat at all, and in fact I've got a threat, which is to play bishop takes f6, which will either destroy his pawn structure or win the exchange, because if he takes with the knight I can take the rook on c8. Alright, but the most important thing is that I'm avoiding e4, I'm getting my bishop on the outside of the pawn chain, putting it where it's very useful and exerting some serious pressure. And note that, of course, if black plays a move like rook c to d8, well, this just kind of reverses the problem. Now I take this way, and if he recaptures with the knight, then his rook on d8 falls. And if he plays rook takes d7, of course I play bishop f6 and really mess up his pawn structure on the king side. At least I can consider that. I mean, I don't have to play it. Maybe, the only thing I'm worried about here is if I can control these light squares well enough. So maybe I can maneuver my knight to f1 to g3 and then f5, or in some cases h5, maybe play f4 trying to blast open the lines over there. So something along those lines definitely cries out to be played, and working out the best way to do it. Okay, that's beyond the scope of what we need to discuss here, but that would be the way to continue. And if there isn't anything good, then I should simply not play bishop takes d7 and look for some way of slowly increasing my advantage. Now, something that I should also say about these positions. So with the bishop, when you've got the bishop pair, and of course your opponent doesn't have a bishop pair, but of course has one or more extra knights, then what you usually want to do is restrict the knights. So you restrict the knights, maximize the placement of your pieces, and only when everything is really well prepared, open the position. So it's true that bishops are that they'll function to their highest potential in an open board or a fairly open board, but there isn't necessarily a rush to open the board. Okay, so the point is keep things under control, and if you can open the position when you want to, then the bishop pair can be a huge advantage, and that's really what went on in this game. So I've got his minor pieces very, very much restricted. His knights are completely docile at the moment, and it's just a matter of, again, my slowly improving the position, taking what I can get out of it, and only in due course opening the position for to a decisive effect. Okay, so here Santa played knight to h7. That's how he chose to deal with the threat that I had. All right, now I played rook f to d1, and this carries with it another threat, which is to play, if it's my move, bishop takes d7, queen takes, and then knight to e4. His queen's under attack. And then I follow up with the move knight to d6 after his queen leaves, and I win the exchange. So here, Santa played knight h to f8, which is a good move, bringing it back into the game. So could go to e6 at some point, especially if I played a move like e4, which, as we said, would be quite poor. But again, it just gives his position a bit more harmony. It's more solid. Everything is reasonably well covered for the moment. All right. Well, now I played knight to e4, and this pretty much guarantees that I get two bishops to two knights, because not only am I threatening knight to d6 as something that wins material, but even aside from the fact that there's this fork, I mean, it's just it'd be unbearable to let a knight sit on d6 in a position like this. And as you can see, black really has no way of dealing with that knight, no way of trying to exchange it off. So Santa is pretty much forced to play bishop takes e4, which he did, and takes. And now it's important to note that black is not winning a pawn here. So he played c takes b4, a takes b4, queen c4, rook c4, rook a7. And of course, the first point is that if he plays rook takes b4, I'm delighted to exchange off a rook for a couple of knights here. So material is even in a textbook sense, but practically speaking, this is a really miserable ending for black. And I think unless he plays extremely accurately, I think even if he plays extremely accurately, he's probably lost. But if he doesn't, he's going to lose quite rapidly. I mean, white has a very simple plan of, there's the skewer point, so white has to deal with that in some way or other. But basically, white's setup is to play bishop to d5, e4, and what can black possibly do if white's allowed to achieve that? White's king is not going to get mated, and the threats to f7 are just going to be devastating. So white is very close to winning here, and I think objectively is winning in this position. So Santa rightly rejected that and played the move g5. Now, here I had a nice little finesse. So I thought, okay, I'll just play bishop to e1, protect the pawn, of course, save the bishop, cover the back rank in some cases. And this is fine. There's nothing really wrong with it. But I could have played bishop to g3. The point being that after rook takes b4, not only can I make the exchange that we mentioned before, but I can also play, even better, bishop to c6, which just wins a piece. The knight's attacked 3 times, defended only once, and, well, there's just nothing for black to do about it. So he'd have to move the knight, which he should do anyway. And now, let's say bishop to b1. He still can't really take the pawn on b4 on account of bishop to a2, hitting f7, And the only way for him to cover that is with knight e6, but then I play bishop takes e5, and my bishops are just ideal in this position. So this is completely losing for black. So he doesn't have to take on b4, but I mean I basically have all those same advantages anyway. I'll play bishop to a2 regardless, and black will fall apart. Also threatening rook to d6. Okay, so bishop g3 would have been better, but I played bishop to e1, knight f6, bishop to d3, rook c to c8, rook to b7. Alright, so black's position is quite awkward. He can't defend it on the third rank, because if he plays rook to e6, I have bishop to f5 with the skewer this way, and if he plays rook to c6, then I play bishop to b5, and he gets shish kebabbed that way. So he really has no choice here. And he can't play a knight to d7 for the same reason. I can play bishop to f5 or bishop to b5, and that'll win the exchange. So rook to b8 is forced. I swap. And here I think I make another good move. It's not, let's say, a fundamentally game-changing move. I mean, even if I don't play this, I still have a nice advantage, and it doesn't just give me a decisive advantage by virtue of playing it. But I think it is a good move, and worth taking a moment to try to see if you can figure it out for yourselves. Okay, well the move that I played is bishop to b5. And I like this for a few reasons. So one is that, of course, I'm opening the d file for my rook. So here, he's not really threatening rook. He's not threatening rook to d8 because I have bishop to h7 check. But still, I mean, I want to use the file. So bishop to b5 enables me to do that. And it's clearing d6. So not only am I going to use it, but I'm going to use it in a very immediate way with rook to d6, putting the rook on a fantastic location where it hits the pawn on b6, hits the knight on f6, and also exerts pressure on the pawn on h6. Not that it's even remotely likely that I'm going to win the pawn on that square, but it ties down his king and or his knight to its protection. So very useful for me. Also, the bishop on b5 fixes the pawn on b6, which, again, with my rook going to d6, is quite convenient for me. And it also prevents his knights from going to d7. So I'm kind of cutting the board in half with this move too. So I think it's a very good move. All right, Sena played knight to g6. I played rook to d6. He plays king to g7. And okay, once again, I think it's a reasonable moment to try to figure out what I ought to play here. So I've got two pieces that aren't in the game at this point, the king and the bishop on e1. So these guys are both inactive. So what should I play at this point? So again, take a moment, come up with whatever seems best to you. Okay, well, as I said, those are the two fundamental options, and it might seem like a pretty good idea to activate my bishop, especially since the pawn on b6 is kind of weak. So a move that I think should come to mind is e4, which does a few things that are pretty useful. So it's fixing this pawn on e5, and most obviously, it's clearing this diagonal for the bishop to come to f2, and then looks like I'm just going to win the pawn on b6. So happy days here. Also, by playing e4, I'm preventing him from playing e4. So a move like e4 in some positions could be a good idea. Now here, it would be a terrible idea on account of bishop to c3, and I simply win the knight. But there are positions where playing e4 could prove useful. So let's consider e4. And here's why I think it's not the best move in the position. After e4, g4. So black should go for counterplay. If he just sits and waits for me to take the b pawn, I mean, it's going to be all over. So black has to try to get his knights into the game, has to try to create some kind of counterplay wherever he can. I mean, passive defense is very likely going to be hopeless, especially when I'm threatening to win material. So g4, bishop f2, takes, and now a good move here again, rook to a8. And all of a sudden his rook is right into the game, and sure, I can take this pawn on b6, but after rook to a3, now out of nowhere, seemingly, black has counterplay. So he's hitting the f3 pawn, maybe threatening to play rook to b3, at some point tying me down most awkwardly to this pawn on b4. Furthermore, maybe a move like knight to h4 is coming, and or knight h5 and then knight f4. So you can see, I mean, it's not like I'm losing here, but I think, aside from the extra pawn, black has the better position now. And it's messy. Okay, it's a needlessly messy situation. So let's go back to the position here. And what I chose instead was king to f2. And I think this is the right way to handle the position. So I leave my kingside pawn structure compact and hard for him to get at. I'm activating my king, which first of all will prevent my king from getting into trouble. It won't be stuck on the back rank. It won't be stuck on the king side where the rook and the knights can all kind of gang up on it. Also, as it centralizes a bit, it's going to prevent some possible routes for his rook to get activated. So I think this is the right move, king f2. All right, Santa played a good move. He plays h5. So again, he too is trying to maintain whatever chances for activity he can possibly scrape up on the board. I play king e2, and now again I can consider e4 and bishop to f2, although I probably have to play g3 first. But all of the d-file squares are covered. Of course, I've already got my rook on the d-file, but the point is my rook can look for other locations, conceivably, and to do so in such a way that I limit his rook even further. All right, so h4 is a good move, and I play bishop to c3, which I think is also good. And now I've got a couple of good ideas here. So one point of bishop to c3 is that now there's maybe the possibility of something like g3 followed by f4, trying to take advantage of this knight on f6 and the pin or potential pin on the long diagonal. Also, after f4, even if I'm not winning his knight, or let's say making serious threats to that effect, if the e-pawn leaves, then my bishop might be able to come to a square like d4, where it'll exert probably decisive pressure on the pawn on b6. So I think bishop c3 is simply a good move. Just activates it more or less for free, so nothing is really hurt by this in the meantime. Okay, again, black needs some counterplay somewhere, but what is he going to do? Okay, he can't move this knight because the e5 pawn falls. Whoops. He can't move the knight on f6 really, because then I get rook to d7 in. And where's it going to go anyway? There aren't really any safe pawn pushes at this point. He can't move the king because the knight on f6 falls. So he's essentially left to rook moves. Now, if he's going to keep the pawn on b6 guarded, I mean, there's just rook b7, rook b8. Not overwhelmingly inspiring here. So he could try rook c8, but then I play king to d2, and he's got nothing doing over there. So in the game, Santa played rook to a8. Gets a little flurry of activity. Now, again, I don't really want to take on b6 because rook to a2 check. I have to play bishop to d2, and then he can start pushing the pawns. So I've messed up my coordination in that way. So I played bishop to c4 here. So this prevents his rook from coming to a2, and I'm eyeing f7, and I'm still threatening the b6 pawn. Okay, now he plays rook to c8. I play king to d3, and after all of this, he's essentially got nothing left but rook to b8. So he's back to where he started from. Now, again, I think we have an interesting moment, a good place to try to figure out what white to move ought to do. So again, stop the recording for a little bit and see what you can come up with. I think it's another interesting moment. Okay, well, you may recall a few moves ago I played bishop to b5 to try to fix this pawn on b6 where it's especially weak. Now, if I play bishop to b5 here, I thought, well, okay, he'll keep activating his rook. You know, maybe play rook to a8 again. Though here it's not nearly as good, so I think bishop to b5 does merit consideration. In the game, I played the move b5, and this, of course, fixes the pawn in place. And now I no longer have to worry about it, and I'm keeping my bishop on c4, which is very good. And this isn't a bad move. But I think maybe even better is king to c2. And the idea behind this is to bring the king to b3 So let's say rook to b7, king to b3. And now the king is out of the way of all the tricks. Okay, so it's perfect. I mean, so now let's think about all the places where his rook could possibly get counterplay. The a file? Well, no. I've got a4, a3, and a2 covered with my king, and a1 covered by my bishop. Okay, the c file, again, nothing doing. My king is covering c4, so there's no penetration available there. And the d file is covered by my rook. So we simply got nothing. All right, now I probably rejected this idea on account of b5, either here or on the previous move. But again, I think this is really, well, not again, but I think this is just a ghost at best. For one thing, I could simply play bishop to d3, and I think this just wins material, because now I'm threatening bishop takes g6, followed by bishop takes e5. And it's far from clear what black to move ought to do about this. He can't move the knight because the e5 pawn hangs. That is, he can't move the knight on g6. If he moves the knight from f6, well, it doesn't. First of all, it doesn't stop the threat, and I can also play maybe rook to d5, hitting the b5 pawn as well. So here, black is just dead lost. So king c2, I think, would have been the best move. This would have, I think, ended resistance fairly quickly. So b5, it's not a bad move, but I definitely missed an opportunity. And also, you know, not only is my king not really ideally placed at the moment, but b5 takes away one very good option for me while giving him a new option. Okay, so let's go back to this position after king c2, rook to b7, king to b3. One point behind this is that if the rooks get traded, so let's say rook to d7 happens. Now, of course, I can just play rook takes b6. You know, he can play rook to d1. Maybe he gets a little counterplay. So let's just say I play it safe here. Takes. Well, now what I can play is king to a4, followed by king to b5, maybe king c6, and his b pawn is desperately weak, and he still has no counterplay here. His knights are passive. They don't have any squares in the center, and you know, basically all the play is on my side of the board, and my king is beautifully placed where it is. Well, after playing the move b5, that's no longer open to me. I mean, I can still try to work my king into the c6 square, but it's a lot harder here than it would have been with b5 available. All right, and the thing that I make possible for my opponent now is at some point to put a knight on c5. So, you know, maybe it's just laziness that I didn't really look at b5 seriously enough to just see that, okay, in a position like this, bishop d3 is just devastating. So I thought my king was okay enough where it was, and didn't finish the job. So that's too bad. I mean, it would have been a nice continuation of the plan with king f2, king e2, to swing it all the way over to b3. So again, complete the prophylaxis first, take away all of my opponent's possibilities, since, again, he's got no activity here at all, and only then look for the kill. Okay, so b5, rook to b7, g3. And, you know, this is a little bit questionable. It has a good idea behind it, which is to support the f4 advance, which, again, tries to exploit this diagonal. But every time you exchange pawns, you're making it just a little bit, making your opponent's defensive task just a little bit easier. All right, so anyway, g3, you know, really it's fine. I just didn't follow it up properly. Okay, so hg, and now if, for example, he plays knight to h5, trying for a little counterplay, well, bishop to d5 is very strong, because if he moves the rook horizontally along the 7th rank, then I pick up the b6 pawn, and if he goes back, then I play rook to d7, which is definitely progress. So, for that reason, as uncomfortable as it is, my opponent played rook to d7. And now I took, he took. After king to e4, I'm winning here. So g3 was fine. No, in fact, it probably is a decent move. Again, it's just I didn't follow it up a little bit later in the best way. At any rate, here life is very good. So my king is threatening to penetrate both via d5 and f5. The e5 pawn is under pressure. The b6 pawn is very weak. And I also maybe have the idea of f4, trying to exploit this diagonal. So black is in a world of hurt in this position. So he played king to f6, which is as good as anything else. So he's activating his king, keeping my king out of f5, protecting all of his pawns. And I think I made a good move in response. I played bishop to b4. So I'm keeping his king from running over to the queen side via e7, and also I'm stopping knight to c5, because if he plays knight c5, I just take and play king d5. All right, so here Sena played knight to e7, and at this point I start making some errors. So here I think I would definitely recommend stopping the recording and seeing what you can come up with. All right, so this I think is a critical point in the game. Not the last one, but it certainly is a critical point. Now, in the game I chose to play bishop takes e7 check. So I'm giving up one of my bishops, and I felt a little bit bad about that, but it lets my king penetrate via d5 or f5. So, and I still am winning. I don't think the game or the full point has been given away yet. But I think there are two moves that are probably even better. So one move is better. So g4. All right, and this I think would have been a very nice continuation. So this keeps his knight off of f5. It doesn't hurt anything. I mean, there's no real way for him to make progress here. And, so it keeps all of his things off f5. King, the knight, and later on a pawn. And prevents him from playing g4. I'm fixing all his pawns on dark squares. So it does everything I could possibly want. Okay, so here black has two possibilities. Just playing passively with knight to b8 and playing actively with knight to c5 check. And this, I think, is why I didn't want to allow it. Because maybe subconsciously I thought, okay, bishop c5, bc5, and maybe black is going to be able to get some kind of blockading idea with knight to c8 and then knight to b6. And I may have noticed, I mean, it's a long time ago and I certainly don't recall, and I didn't make a note of it, but maybe I had looked something like b6, knight c8, b7, knight to d6 check, and black is fine. But in this position, if I had played g4 and then knight c5 takes, here if I just play bishop to b3, I win. So it's simply Zugzwang at this point. If black moves his king away, I just take on e5, life's good, I'm up a pawn, I win. He can't move any pawn. Three of them, just they physically can't move, and the c-pawn would simply be lost. So that just leaves knight moves, but then I penetrate. So knight c8, king d5, I'm in, I win the c-pawn, my b-pawn's going to cost him his knight, game over. So maybe that's what I missed, I don't recall, but knight to c5 check is no threat at all. Alright, let's consider knight to b8, so just passive play in this position. Well, here, first of all, I could play bishop takes e7 check and then king takes e5, and I win a pawn. So at the very worst, this would be a better version of the game. But also I can play the sadistic f4. Now the point is that black can't ever take with the g-pawn because of g5 check, and then the knight on e7 falls. Okay, so he's got to play, let's say, knight to g6 here, and now f5, knight f4, check, f6 check, king f5, and wins. Okay, so you can play maybe knight h3, I play bishop f1. So I'm winning a pawn, he's got no counterplay, his knights stink, his king stinks, everything is bad for black, so easy win. Alright, so, it would have been a little bit to see, but just the basic idea that g4 maintains everything, and really all I needed to see was that knight c5 doesn't do the job on account of this nice retreat with bishop to b3. And game's over. Alright, so instead I play bishop takes e7, king takes e7, and here again I should have played g4. So I'm fixing him in place, fixing these pawns in place, and I don't have to worry about his king moving. I mean, if it goes to d6, he loses the f-pawn, plus king net, well, okay, I take, and then I play king f5, wins easily. If he plays knight c5, of course I just take, f6, and this is not going to be a successful dark squared blockade. So sometimes positions like this, you can get worried. You see, okay, the opponent's got all the pawns on dark squares, and so what's my bishop going to do? I mean, just nothing, you might think. But after f4, black is again in Zugzwang. If he moves his king, so let's say he plays king to e7, then takes, king e5, and king f5, and I'm making decisive progress. What else can he do? If he plays g takes f4, he takes f4, he's in the same situation. Again, either his king or knight gives way. So what if his knight moves back here? Well, in this case, just king e4, and then king f5. So the attempt to blockade on the dark squares is just unsuccessful. So g4 then, in this position, would have been the best move. Instead, I played king to d5. And again, it's not bad, but it's a step in the wrong direction in that with the move f5, now he's at least gaining possibilities of counterplay. Now, I should be able to handle this position quite comfortably, but the point is, I didn't even have anything to calculate. So if I just played g4 before, then you keep the guy in the box and you don't have to worry. But so here it's becoming a little bit messy. Now with bishop to d3, I believe I'm winning. So for example, if f4, I just take twice, and this scared me because I'm afraid I'm running out of pawns here. Obviously if he becomes bishop and one pawn versus knight, then it's a draw, as long as his king is in a very, very bad position, because he can just give up his knight for the remaining pawn. But 2 pawns here is still enough. So say bishop to f5, king c6, bishop c2. I win the b6 pawn, and he's not going to be able to trade off the kingside pawns, so this will be a win. If he plays g4, I'm okay here too. So takes, bishop f5, and alright, I'm threatening to just take his knight and then take the pawn on e5. So he's got to give up something. So let's say knight f6, and then knight h5, and then here white wins with bishop to h3. So I don't allow knight to f1, and I'm going to continue with king d5, king c6. So this is good enough to win. Alright, so I'm still winning, but you can see the margin is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Alright, now here I played bishop to f1, and I kind of liked this move during the game, though in fact I think it probably throws away the win. Though my opponent makes some mistakes too. We're both in time pressure, and again, now it becomes just all calculation, and no longer can I just kind of win by making nice natural moves. Okay, now I have to actually work. Okay, so here actually is a good moment to try to figure out what black ought to play. Alright, so here's what my opponent did. He played the move f4. Very natural, trying to exchange off all the pawns, but it's not the best move. The best move would have been e4 with this devilish little trick, f takes e4, knight f6 check. And here the pawns just disappear too rapidly. So king c6, knight e4, king b6, knight g3, king c7, knight e4, b6, knight to d6. And, alright, I'm not willing to say with 100% certainty that this is a draw, but it's probably a draw. And at any rate, if white's winning, white has to become a genius. White has to play brilliantly to pull this off. So it's not going to be easy at all, if it's even possible to win. Okay, so back to the game. My opponent played f4. I took. He took this way, which is very clever. And here, again, I made a wrong decision. What I played was e4, and this is bad. What I should have played is takes, and then bishop to h3, and then this, and then bishop f5 followed by bishop to c2. So again, I was just afraid of exchanging pawns in general. So I was still hoping that I could just win by automatic means. So you just make all the natural moves, you keep your pawns, I've got this big space advantage. How could I possibly not be winning? Well, I'm still winning. Actually, I'm not winning if he plays correctly here. So there's still another couple of errors by both sides in this position. Here, my opponent should have played knight to f6 check, and then after king c6, g4. So Counterplay right away. Takes, 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 and now king to d6. And surprisingly, I don't think I can win anymore. Maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe there's some some super subtle win for white, but I don't think so anymore. So, for example, if king to a6, preparing to push the b pawn, f3, b6, knight e5, and then knight to d7. Threatening knight to c5 check now. So, king a7, f2, bishop h3. And now the key point is that black's threatening to queen as well. So, king e5. Takes, queen, queen, takes the pawn, and this is a draw. All right, and queen and bishop versus queen, I mean, unless there's some immediate forcing tactical sequence that allows white to win the queen or give mate, it's a draw, and that's the case here. There's no way for white to force a win. So it's true that black will have to probably be careful. I'm sure there are going to be some tricks, and if I'm playing a computer, I could quite possibly lose with black. So I mean, I don't know that it's trivial yet, but at least objectively speaking, this position is a draw. So after e4, I got to another break. Then my opponent played king to f6, and now if I had played king to c6, or sorry, if I had played king c6, knight to e5 check, I think he's a little slow. So the king, it'll be similar to the last line we looked at, but king f6 isn't going to help black at all compared to the other variation. So king e7, and now bishop g2 puts black in a fatal zugzwang. If he moves his king to e6, of course, I have bishop to h6 check, and that just wins, obviously, immediately. If he plays king to d8, though, then I can play king to d6, and then it's the e pawn and the possibility of swinging my king over to grab his kingside pawns that does the job. And of course, if he moves the knight, then I just take the pawn on b6 with a win. So that was another missed opportunity. So I played bishop to e2, and here king to e7 holds. So again, not 100% sure, but I think it's the case. So it's like king e6, bishop f1, g4. So all complicated stuff. Much easier to find in the comfort of your living room with unlimited time and with electronic confirmation than over the board. All right, so this is, not something that would have happened during the game. But the point is, objectively, black is still drawing there. Okay, in the game he played knight to e5, and here I think I missed a last win. Okay, so the last win would have been with bishop to d1. Okay, now if knight to d7, king d6, and my king is going to get where it needs to get. If he plays knight to d3, okay, king to d6, key move, knight e5, and now king c7. And at the end of all of this fun stuff, black is in zugzwang. If he moves his king, he loses the knight. So whether he loses it to my king taking it or to my bishop taking it with check, doesn't matter. Either way I win. I mean, of course, you can play f1 queen, but then I have no problem. I take the queen, and anything wins after that. So I had one last win. But as you can see, I mean, the wins are becoming increasingly complex. Again, we're still short of time here. I think the time control was 50 moves in whatever, or maybe it was game and whatever it was. And we're on move 47 now. So, again, just allowing this kind of imbalanced situation gave black too many chances. All right, so I played king to d6, plays g4. This is the only move. It's a good move, and it draws. And from here on, I don't think there were any mistakes by either player. Okay, so I took. He plays f3. And if I play bishop to f1, he takes on g4 and plays knight e3, and he draws. So I thought, all right, let's just take here. I've got 3 pawns. Maybe he won't be able to stop everything. The problem is he has enough time to take on g4. And now his knight is going to take care of my b6 pawn, well, my b5 pawn, while his king handles the e5, sorry, not sure why I keep adding squares to my pawns placement. So the king will go to e5 maybe in some lines, but the pawn's on e4. So anyway, the king takes care of the e pawn, the knight takes care of the b pawn, and it's a draw. So king c7, king e7, b6, knight e5, and then knight to d7. And he's there in time. So, I play a few more moves just out of disgust. And that was a good move too. And of course, if I queen, he plays knight to a6 check, and then takes, and then plays king e6 and king e5. So last little joke, I play b8 knight, king e6, and then knight to d3. And finally, the draw was agreed. So, very disappointing ending to a game that, of course, I was winning and should have won with good technique. And but the mistakes I made, I think, were instructive ones. So first of all, I let him out of the box with f5. So, going back to this position, up to here, I feel like I had pretty much done everything right. And just simply playing g4, keeping him tied up, not giving him any space on the king side, maintaining all of my advantages, would have made the win almost automatic. I mean, just normal moves. The fruit would drop of its own accord from the tree. All right, so my failure to play that, and then once we get to here, now all of a sudden it's tricky. So again, even the move before, after I exchanged off the first bishop for knight, again g4 keeps him in the box, and I'm winning from there. All right, but once we get to here, I'm still winning, but increasing accuracy is needed. So what are the lessons to learn from this? Well, first, clearly when you're combating knights, if you can keep them locked up, if you can prevent them from gaining counterplay, do it. That's all to your advantage. There's no real drawback to that. And the thing to remember is, you don't have to get the bishops strafing the board right away. So they'll find their way to these open lines as long as you have control over opening the position. All right. Secondly, one of these most basic rules: don't allow your opponent unnecessary counterplay. All right. So if you can maintain all the advantages in your position without allowing counterplay, do so. Stop the opponent from getting any chance. Don't give him a break. Don't give him an opportunity to get lucky here. And what else? Another thing is, while you shouldn't allow unnecessary pawn exchanges, I would say, of course, you shouldn't be paranoid about them either. So a few times I went out of my way to avoid exchanging pawns, and by doing so, I ended up giving him more chances than he deserved in the first place. So that, I would say, is another very important lesson. All right, so be aware of that, but don't go out of your way. Don't go crazy. Don't give up counterplay to avoid pawn exchanges. And I would say another really fundamental rule with endings like this, and something that I think is quite difficult for a lot of players who, ironically enough, like to play technical chess. So something that they need to follow or to be aware of is that in most games there comes a point where you're sort of massaging your opponent to death. You've got these advantages and you're creeping along, you're improving everything, you're gaining space, restricting the opponent, etc. There comes a point where you really do have to calculate something, where if your opponent's putting up good resistance, the game will not just win itself automatically. And at that point, you just have to stop and calculate and get out of the mindset. See, that's the key thing. You have to get out of this mindset where you're just looking for the game to win itself. All right. And Mark Dvoretsky has written about this, and he's pointed that out, that Petrosian, for example, so one of the greatest technical players of all time, that he would have this problem, and that when he would face some of the very few people in the world who could put up resistance against him, like Boris Spassky, that he would often fail to win games where he had big advantages for this very reason. Likewise with Karpov, against, less so with Karpov, but when he would play someone like Kasparov, that sometimes he would fail to win games where he had, big technical advantages, not because Kasparov forced a draw, but because he was, again, so used to just having the game win itself that, forcing himself to kind of get dirty and win games by actually having to calculate variations, changing into that mindset proved too difficult on a number of occasions. So I would say that that's also something that you have to be aware of, and that's certainly what happened to me in this game. I just wanted to let the game win itself, and maybe if I had played the most accurate moves at a couple of points, it would have. But with those couple of little lapses in there, it then became the kind of game where I had to change gears and do some serious calculation and not just play by general principles. And when I didn't do so, it threw away half a point. Okay, so I think I've made that clear enough, and I hope you guys all learned from that. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it, and enjoyed it certainly more than I did, at least the last part of the game. And but of course, also hope that you learned something and that you'll avoid again the mistakes that I made. But I did some things well too. Hopefully, you'll be able to follow suit in that respect also. So thank you, and I'll see you next week. Oh, one more thing. Don't forget to check out my blog, chessmind.powerblogs.com, chessmind.powerblogs.com. Thank you again, and goodbye.